first I should mention that Indus Script dates back to about 4000 BC. So the earliest script which has been found with Indus symbols was at Balakot, and it's dated to around 4000 BC. It was on some shards of pottery. Okay, so Yajnadevam used the approach of cryptography, which means code breaking. And his work was based on the work of Claude Shannon, who is the father of modern information theory.
Okay.
Okay, so Shannon basically had a very famous paper written in 1945, and this was based on some work he did during the Second World War. So during the Second World War, Shannon was basically asked to find out how to make secret messages or secret ciphers unbreakable.
Okay.
And this was very important in conveying intelligence during a war. Okay, so Shannon found that this actually cannot be done because every code can actually be broken if you manage to read enough text in that code, and if you are reading it and it's making sense as you're decoding it. And he even found that there is a threshold which can be mathematically defined, where if you read enough beyond that threshold, then it means your decipherment is not only correct, but it's unique. Okay, so like as an example, suppose I read enough text, I unscramble enough of the coded messages, and I find out that a particular code says, I will meet you here on Tuesday, then I can't also mean by that same code that I'm running out of eggs for breakfast. Okay, so the solution has to be unique. Okay, so Yajnadevam, how did he apply this to decipherment? Okay, so he decided to treat the Indus script as a code. Okay. So as a code for what? So as a code for a language, particular language. And then, of course, the challenge was which language to choose as a candidate. Okay, so before, I get to the specifics of that, maybe, I can elaborate on why this concern for uniqueness was so important.
Yeah, please.
So, as I, previously briefly referred to, that in the previous decipherments of the Indus script, previous attempts at deciphering, people were basically assigning meanings to very short inscriptions. And then they found that these meanings we have assigned don't make sense if these same symbols appear in a longer inscription. Okay, for example, suppose I am a decipherer. I find 3 signs with each with one symbol, and I give them meanings. So if I say the meanings are cat, jar and go, then suddenly a 4th inscription is found. It has all 3 of these signs. Then I'm in trouble because I can't argue that cat, jar, go means anything. Yeah. It's not a sentence.
So random.
Yeah, exactly. So what these decipherers then had to do is they said that, okay, this symbol means something in a short sentence, it means something else in a longer message. So they kept assigning more and more meanings to it. Now, from the point of view of Shannon's approach, which I just mentioned, then this does not work because you can never reach that threshold at which you can prove correctness and uniqueness. Okay, why? Because he referred to the size of text which is decoded, but the size is defined relative to the number of possible solutions. But here what's happening is the more messages you are trying to read, the more possible solutions you yourself are assigning. So that is also going up, that set which is called the key space, that's also expanding. So there was absolutely no way to find out or establish that any of these decipherments are correct. Okay, so they were also what we call unfalsifiable, which means you cannot prove, you cannot verify them in any way. So the proposed solution cannot be verified. And the decipherers, therefore, they also could not read too many inscriptions, so just a few. And so what Yajnadevam then did is he was concerned with maintaining this approach where he can actually establish uniqueness. So, which language to try, that's where, that's what I was discussing. So, one So one thing, should be clarified, which is that suppose you start off with a wrong hypothesis. So let's say, like I gave this example earlier, let's say I say that I'm going to try it with English. Okay, which is, of course, we know that has to be wrong because of the dates.
Yeah.
But I start trying, then I'll find very soon that I can't read most of the inscriptions in English. I can maybe read the ones which have one letter because I can assign any English letter to that, okay, which is a valid word like I. But when I start trying to read longer inscriptions and see whether they form meaningful English words, I'll find that they don't, right? So immediately the decipherment process itself will reveal whether the assumption on the language was right or wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you start with a correct language, then what will happen is even when you start reading longer inscriptions, you'll actually get words which make sense. You'll get a grammatically correct sentence in the longer ones.
Because the errors are
Yeah.
minimized.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if it's correct, then when you read it in that language, then it's going to be a valid word and it's going to form a
That
sentence.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, Yajnadevam, so one thing he could have done is he could have just tried many different languages as candidates and he would have found out whether they are right or wrong. But he was able to, lessen his work a little bit because in the beginning he could actually rule out a very large family of languages called agglutinative languages.
Okay.
So these include all South Indian, that is Dravidian languages, many other modern languages, and many ancient languages which were spoken in the Near East or the Middle East. So those include Sumerian, Elamite, Hattic, Hittite, Hebrew, etc. Okay, so the reason he could rule them out is because there were mismatches in the structure of the Indus symbols and the structure of these languages. But actually the structure of the Indus symbols was compatible with Sanskrit.
Okay.
So I can go into some of the mismatches and matches. So one thing first was that in the Indus script there were some symbols which were repeated 3 times consecutively, so next to each other, and this is very uncommon. So like it does not happen at all in any agglutinative language. It does happen in Vedic Sanskrit. So Vedic Sanskrit has some verb forms where there are words like ja ja ja, la la la, sa sa sa, da da da, etc. Okay, so so this seemed to indicate that it can't be those languages, it can be Sanskrit. Now the second mismatch was that in the Indus symbols there were basically compound words which were formed of more than 2 root words. Now this happens in Sanskrit, but it doesn't happen in the agglutinative languages. And finally, there was one other thing, that the agglutinative languages have many prefixes or suffixes which are meaningless on their own. So they cannot exist as separate words. And they also always appear in a fixed positional order. So, but in the Indus script, the possible prefixes and suffixes also appeared on their own as separate words. Okay, and they also were appearing in different order in the different inscriptions. So this was not consistent with agglutinative languages, but it's consistent with Sanskrit. Okay, so for all these reasons, he started by, hypothesizing that let's see if Sanskrit is the language. So then what happened once he, tried out Sanskrit? So first he basically used standard code breaking methods. So the standard method is that you first try to find the meaning of a particular symbol, just one, which occurs very frequently and which has some standard patterns of repetitions. You try to find a dictionary match for that using a Sanskrit dictionary. So he was using the Monier-Williams dictionary. And so he first assigned a value to one of the symbols, and then the next step is you identify the symbol which occurs pretty frequently with the one you have just assigned a value to, and you assign something to that. So you basically proceed in a sequence until you have assigned values to all of the symbols. And then basically you can try out and see if your decipherment is making sense or not. So then he found that, okay, after assigning these values, when he tries to read the actual inscriptions, the messages in Indus Script, they're making sense. They're actually forming valid Sanskrit words. And in the longer inscriptions, they are, grammatically correct and they mean something. And then the best thing which he did is that he was able to cross Shannon's threshold. So Shannon's threshold for this decipherment was, I believe it was 417 or something like that. 400, between 400 and 500 symbols of text had to be correctly read and deciphered. So then Yajnadevam realized that, okay, if I read the 50 longest inscriptions successfully and if they are making sense, then I'll cross the threshold, because each such inscription is more than 10 symbols long. So once he crossed that threshold, it was basically established that his decipherment is correct. So Sanskrit actually is the language. And because it also shows uniqueness, it means that not only does Sanskrit work for decipherment, but if we substitute some other language, that won't work. So Sanskrit is basically uniquely the language of the Indus Valley Civilization or the Saraswati Sindhu Civilization. And also, till now he's basically deciphered the entire corpus. So he's gone way beyond that threshold. So I think on his website, which is called indusscript.net, there are about 3,674 inscriptions, and he has deciphered all of them. So he also has a key there that which Indus symbols map into which Sanskrit letter. And he has also translated, like from Sanskrit to English, about 60% of the inscriptions.